Israel has upgraded travel warnings for citizens travelling to Australia and 80 other countries over the rise in anti-Semitism. Israel's National Security Council has raised its travel warning to level 2, advising heightened vigilance over increased attempted attacks against Israeli nationals. Several countries in Western Europe, including the UK, France and Germany, were raised to level 2 along with Australia. The opposition is calling on the Prime Minister to address the rise in anti-Semitism.
This is a terrible stain on Australia, the idea that Jewish people or Israeli citizens would somehow have to take extra precautions in visiting Australia because of the rise in anti-Semitism, because of the type of intimidatory tactics that we've seen various protests and other actions engage in. This is something that must be tackled at the highest levels.
The Executive Council of Australian Jewry has also issued a statement saying this reflects a damning new reality of soaring anti-Semitism and a volatile security situation at home and abroad. The fact that being identifiably Israeli or Jewish now comes with risks is a national shame. Joining me for more on this now, Dr. John Coyne, Head of Strategic Policing and Law Enforcement at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thanks for your time. We have seen incidents in Australia. Is it a fair comment that being identifiably Jewish would place you at more risk today in Australia?
Look, I don't think so. I think there is some confusion here over the difference between pro-Palestinian and pro-Gaza protesting and anti-Semitic racist protests. And I think, very key to our democracy is the right to protest and to political expression. It's equal rights here that you can protest and demonstrate against the 7 October attacks against Israel, but you could also protest about the casualties in Gaza. I do think that Israel is very much trying to control the global narrative. Protest against the war in Gaza does not mean you're anti-Semitic.
Look, no element of this is totally absent from politics, but we did see some pretty volatile at times protests in Caulfield, which would be, I think that area probably the highest concentration of Jewish people in Australia, and at least reports of threats, things yelled out windows and so on, which seem to have only happened at a larger scale since October 7. I guess you can always decide what the threat level is, but these have only happened since then, right? So does it still indicate some increased risk?
Look, I think that the question here is has there been, and now risk is an interesting one, it's a mixture between capability and intent. Are Jewish people actually, or Israelis, being targeted for protests? There is no doubt about that. Is some of that protest not peaceful protest? Absolutely. And those protesters who use things and inflammatory language and anti-Semitic language and apply threats of both physical violence or intimidation should be charged appropriately under Australian law. But overall, are people being targeted for physical harm in Australia? There's certainly not been that's the evidence the case. Have there been provocative protests? Absolutely.
Yeah, the Caulfield one spilled over into some violence. I think was probably the most obvious element. I guess governments, it's incumbent on them to warn people, even if that hasn't happened yet. Look, these, the level down's happening, you wouldn't rule out the next one. So if people did want to take precaution, even if they just wanted to, not be identifiably Jewish, then at least they've been warned. I get what you're saying around we haven't hit that level yet, but I guess one comes before the other normally. Normally it's the sort of volatile protest before violence, and we hope this doesn't happen. Violence might break out.
Look, I think there can be no doubt that there's always a risk, and this is, of violence, and this is certainly in terms of politically motivated violence. ASIO is regularly making these assessments. There can be no doubt that the state and territory and federal police and the security agencies must address violent forms of protest. The images we're seeing on the screen are criminal in nature, and they should be treated as criminal in nature. Those involved should be arrested. They should be prosecuted and appropriately punished when found guilty in a court of law.
Okay.
However, that shouldn't impact two things. First off, on the choices of how people represent themselves in Australian communities. Secondly, which is disgraceful in this day and age. Secondly, is that we most definitely should be making sure that we protect the rights of individuals to politically express themselves in peaceful ways.
Wanted to get you quickly as well with your border security expert hat on. From what we know, and it's always limited with the on-water matters, what would you say around boat arrivals, asylum seeker boat arrivals and people smuggler activities since, I guess, the High Court decision and a couple of other things that have happened over the past few months?
You know, look, I always sort of sit there. There's a great irony about our strategy of dealing with irregular maritime arrivals. We're the lucky country. Yet in order to stop boat arrivals, what we had to do was extinguish hope that anyone would ever be resettled in Australia. Over the last month or so, there has been significant changes in that assessment. And certainly for people looking to move irregularly via maritime means, for people smugglers, all of a sudden there is a return of hope. And unfortunately for the lucky country, that does mean that there is going to be a greater attraction to using people smugglers to try to arrive in Australia.
John Coyne, appreciate your time today. Thank you.